Hey everybody, my name is Jacques Boudreau. I'm an engineer in CPRA's Lafayette Regional Office. I want to welcome everyone here to the second installment of the technical webinar series that we're holding as part of CPRA's Coastal Industry Week. We've got Mr. Todd Baker from our project management division who's going to be discussing an engineering and design update on the Chandeleur Island restoration project. What I'm going to be doing is before we get into that, I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items and some logistics, and then give a brief icebreaker over the course of what you can expect throughout Industry Week here at CPRA. So first of all, as you may have just noticed or heard, this meeting is being recorded. We plan to distribute versions of the slides as well as these recordings afterwards via a CPRA listserv email. In the event of any questions, what I'd like you to do is go ahead and type them into the chat box. What's going to happen is I will be monitoring the chat box throughout the course of the webinar presentation. I also want to direct your attention there. I'm going to be including a couple of resources for you. First of all, we've got a link here to our website that will have a more comprehensive outlook of all the events that you can expect to be occurring here as a part of the Industry Week event that we're holding. Next, I'm going to give you some direction on how you can direct any general questions or inquiries. I'm going to provide my state email account as well as a general email account for any questions, and feel free to put any questions pertaining to Industry Week in general to my attention if you like. I'm also going to include in here as well just some more direction on what to do in the event of any questions pertaining to the technical webinar. And without further ado, I'm going to jump into this Coastal Day presentation that if you were in attendance last Thursday at our board meeting, you would have heard Bryn Haas present some of that content there. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but just in an effort to keep things rolling with respect to the technical webinars and just some of the other events to come. This is all centered around a legislative event that's going to occur on Monday, March 25th. It's called Coastal Day at the Legislature. As I'm sure most of y'all are aware, the spring legislative session is now in session as of Monday, March 11th. And one of the days that we have through the state legislature is called Coastal Day. And in conjunction with that, we've got on the implementation side of CPRA, where folks like myself and Todd work, we've got a couple of events that we're directly facilitating, namely a business networking and matchmaking event to occur on Monday, March 25th. It's over there at the LSU Center for River Studies, as well as an industry briefing and project forecast that we're giving on state-led
join the conference
CPRA projects. I'm going to show some more information on both of those and present to you a QR code for anyone that would like to attend that meeting virtually. It is also going to be a combined in-person and virtual meeting that we'll hold at the LaBelle Room over at the LaSalle building. But for those of you who are interested in attending virtually, you can scan that QR code there. And then to continue along the same lines, we're going to host what we call our partner-led session of Industry Week, where we've got a lot of good information on upcoming projects that are going to be let through different construction procurement means, namely through levy districts, through parish governments, parish police juries, things of that nature. And that will occur on Tuesday, March 26th with a QR code there. And finally, to kind of get ready to turn it over to Todd, just a little update on some of the webinar series that we're holding here. Yesterday, I think some of you were probably in attendance. We heard from Mr. Russ Joffrion discussing an update to the marsh creation design guidelines. Today, of course, we're here to hear Mr. Todd Baker on the Chandeleur Islands project pertaining to the E&D. Tomorrow, and this will be at the same time, we're going to hear from Syed Khalil, who's one of our geologist assistant administrators in planning and research. Syed's going to discuss sediment management for a sustainable ecosystem. On Thursday, we'll hear from Stu Brown, who's also in the strategic planning and plan development section of our planning and research division. He's going to talk to you all about coastal change using high tide flooding and historic storm events as it pertains to the coastal master plan, which is where Stu is currently working at. And then finally on Friday, we're going to hear about some avian habitat restoration projects with the folks I show here, who are Katie Freer, who also is in our plan development section at CPRA, and two of our partners that we've worked with through these types of projects, namely John Wiebe from the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries and Eva Winhofer from the Water Institute. So y'all, with that, we want to say thanks again for everyone attending here. I'm going to stop my screen share and invite Todd to show his screen, and I'll look out for any questions. Appreciate it, y'all.
All right, Jacques, thank you. Can you see my screen all right? Is it coming through?
No, I still see the same feed there. Okay, it's coming. I think there might be a little bit of a delay. I just saw it.
Got
Should
it?
be good to go.
All right, thank you. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. I really look forward to presenting this project to you. This is as Jacques mentioned, this is a project that's currently under engineering design, and we're working closely with our partners in the Department of Interior, specifically the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. And the firm that is hired to lead the design effort is Coastal Engineering Consultants. So as you can see from the beginning of the slide here, this is going to be a wildlife and fisheries really driven project. So we'll go ahead and jump into it. See if we can. So the Chandeleur Islands are located between Chandeleur Sound and the Gulf of Mexico and St. Bernard Parish. They're about 75 miles east of New Orleans and 26 miles south of Gulfport and Biloxi, Mississippi. A very remote set of barrier islands, and that remoteness and the habitat in which they occur gives a lot of uniqueness to this islands, which we're going to talk about kind of at a great deal about. But this basically, this arc of barrier islands is the restoration project that's under engineering design. The Chandeleur Islands are part of Breton National Wildlife Refuge, and this is the second oldest refuge in the country, established in 1904. It's the only national wildlife refuge that our conservation president, Theodore Roosevelt, ever visited. So he established the national park system, he established the refuge system, but this is the only federal refuge that he actually set foot on. And due to its uniqueness and the number of birds that nest out there, it was also designated as a federal wilderness area, which gives it a lot of other protections from anthropogenic threats. Unfortunately, since his visit, we've lost about 90% of the refuge. So this is a slide kind of showing a Google Earth image of Chandeleur Islands in 1984. I chose 1984 because that's the oldest image I could get off of Google. And then looking at 2023. And in 1984, there was no North and South Chandeleur Island. It was one big island that was about almost 25 miles in length. You could walk 25 miles without having to jump over cuts or waterways through the island. However, over time, especially after the storm event, 2005 Hurricane Katrina, the island has been reduced quite significantly and broken apart. As we stand today, the largest piece of the Chandeleur Islands is referred to as North Chandeleur Island. That's that 15.2 mile length of island at the top. And it's also been fragmented on the south end, and they call these the South Chandeleur Islands now. So the next slide is kind of zoom in to this dot on your screen, and we'll talk a little bit more about the erosion there. Same images, 84, 2023. You see that dot from the previous image is kind of midway of your screen. You can see where I put pin drops on the 2023 shoreline and 1984 shoreline in both images. But what's happened over time is that, like most barrier islands in Louisiana, the barrier islands have rolled back. And this length is almost a mile and a half between 1984 and 2023. But as the island has rolled back, it's also lost a lot of its sediment. And as a result, that island's becoming fragmented, and we've lost a lot of the wildlife habitat out there. And it used to have some extensive seagrass beds behind South Chandeleur Island, and those are, for the most part, gone now as well. So we're losing the islands very rapidly. Same story throughout much of South Louisiana. So the funding that we received to do the engineering design effort comes from Deepwater Horizon Settlement Funds, specifically through the Region-Wide Trustee Implementation Group, also referred to as the Region-Wide TIG. They provided the funding for engineering design. And the goals for the project are, while quite simple, also very complex and difficult. This is not your typical barrier island restoration project. This is a project that's aimed specifically at restoring habitat for wildlife and fisheries. Our first and foremost goal is to restore and conserve bird nesting habitat, but we also want to enhance the seagrass meadows that are out at the islands. We want to enhance sea turtle nesting habitat. And the fourth goal is to make sure we design an island that's very resilient in the face of our coastal climates moving forward in time. And all the pictures you're going to see on this presentation are from the Chandeleur Islands, unless I pointed out otherwise. I will go ahead and point out in the middle of your screen, you'll hear me talk a lot about seagrasses today. So the middle of the screen is a shot from Chandeleur Islands. You can see the beach and you can see the marsh, but those shadows behind the marsh, those are the seagrass meadows we'll be talking about. So a brief update on the engineering design is much of our island data collection is complete. So we've done the topographic bathymetric surveys, the magnetometer surveys, geotechnical of the island, the vibrocore and the borrower areas. All that data has been collected and is in-house. Some other data collection efforts that are ongoing or have been ongoing on the island are biological surveys, which we don't typically do for a typical marsh or Bear Island restoration project. Some surveys we're going to talk about at length here are the seagrass surveys, the bird surveys, sea turtle surveys, and dolphin surveys. We're doing these additional surveys because there's not a lot of documentation of what that habitat is at Chandeleur Island. So if we want to go restore for birds, restore for sea turtles, we need to know the exact niches or habitat characteristics that they're using so we can build that into design. So we'll start off with the marine seagrass surveys that were completed in 2022. The image you see on the right-hand side of your screen is kind of a heat map of the percent cover of seagrass beds at the Chandeleur Islands. You'll notice in this photograph that the Chandeleur Island itself has been faded out in the background, and the colors you see are actually the percent cover of seagrasses out there. The result of our seagrass survey showed that we had almost 5,200 acres of seagrasses comprised of 5 different species. And this is important because having such a large seagrass meadow with 5 species kind of reaffirms the position that the Chandeleur Island seagrass meadows are the largest, most botanically diverse assemblage of seagrasses found anywhere in the northern Gulf of Mexico. You'll notice if you try to quickly add up these acreages that it exceeds 5,200 acres, and that's because a lot of these species will occur in the same acreage. So we wanted to kind of get a total picture of each species. So in some places you may have 2 to 4 species kind of commingling in a similar area. So next I'm going to put a line on this map. We call this Station 270. And there's kind of a break in the action here. What we see south of Station 270, our seagrass beds are in really good shape, really robust, a lot of good species diversity. But what we see north of it is that the percent cover and the species diversity kind of wanes quite a bit. This is an image looking at kind of the mid portion of Chandeleur Islands. In this area where the seagrasses are in really good shape, you have a nice beach complex, dune complex, and a broad marsh system behind it. And where that occurs, that wave energy from the Gulf is broken, and you see these shadows of the seagrasses, and the seagrasses are quite extensive in this area. Really calm waters, not much turbidity. However, north of that Station 270 looks like this. There's no marsh complex, there's no dune complex. What you have is more or less a super tidal beach. So a lot of this wave energy comes across the island, and the seagrasses behind it are quite pitiful and stressed. You have maybe 1 or 2 species back here, and they're just kind of holding on where they can. So we believe we have a really good opportunity to restore the seagrasses just by increasing the island size and putting those beach dune and berm features in place on the north side. Another survey we conducted and our dolphin surveys. We know due to the location of this island and the uniqueness of this island, but we will have to contend with a lot of federal regulations, including the Marine Mammal Protection Act. One thing we wanted to know, do we have an abundance of marine mammals out here? If so, what kind and where are they? So we did some dolphin surveys primarily because we were just anecdotally seeing a lot of dolphins out there and we needed to be prepared moving forward. So we did some dolphin surveys at the island. This is some traditional NOAA transects that they were already flying east of the river, and we added a cursorial flight around the Chandeleur Islands, kind of a double looping pattern to serve on the same day as the transects were run to kind of get an idea of dolphin abundance and locations. So we flew these surveys for 12 months. and we documented 255 dolphin sightings. And one thing that jumped off the page to us when we started to analyze the data, we normalized the two different survey techniques for effort. So we basically looked at equal amounts of effort spent on each survey, and we noticed that we were 2.5 times more likely to observe dolphins at Chandeleur Island than you were, say, in the marshes of St. Bernard or in Chandeleur Sound. So it really points to the fact dolphins are really kind of attracted to the Chandeleur Islands and obviously use it quite a bit compared to the open water areas and marsh areas. So we wanted to kind of drill down into those dolphin sightings at Chandeleur Island to see if there's any hot spots we needed to be aware of. And sure enough, when you look at the seagrass meadows, there was 91 sightings of dolphins in the seagrass meadows compared to east of the islands or west of the seagrass meadows. So it really kind of points to those seagrass meadows as being very important to dolphins. So something we need to keep in mind moving forward through design and construction. Another survey, and we flew this survey, the sea turtle nesting survey, for a specific reason, a couple specific reasons. First of all, prior to us flying these surveys at Chandeleur Island, Louisiana was known to not contribute significantly to nesting sea turtles in the Gulf of Mexico. However, knowing that this is a pristine habitat, and knowing that there's not a lot of eyes on this property due to its remoteness, we thought it was prudent to go fly these surveys to, number one, we didn't want to get into construction and then learn we have sea turtles nesting out there, and that creates a whole nother level of review and potentially shuts down the project or at least interrupts it a little bit. So we wanted to kind of be ahead of the game on that. But number two, we had some biologists that thought they were nesting out there, at least a few of them, and we want to make sure we restored and protected that habitat. So we started flying sea turtle surveys with a protocol developed with our federal partners in NOAA and the Department of the Interior. We flew float planes out in 2022 looking for evidence of sea turtle nesting, and that evidence is a crawl, basically where a female sea turtle crawls up on the beach, makes a nest, and returns. And on our first flight in 2022, we had our first crawl. And then in 2023, we started flying the surveys again, really kind of looking more at the nesting characteristics, locations, so that we could carefully describe that for restoration moving forward. So the results of 2 years of survey were that we saw 54 crawls each year, or 108 total. We also did some genetic analysis on them. Again, in 2022, we didn't do as much analysis as 2023 because in 22, we were just looking to see if indeed they were nesting out there. Once we learned that, we started doing a little more analysis in 2023. But basically, the results of some genetic testing told us that we have 2 species nesting out there, loggerheads and Kemp's ridleys. And Kemp's ridleys are significant because they are the most critically endangered sea turtle in the world, and we believe most of our nesting out there are Kemp's ridleys. And this is an image. I'll put this in animation for you. This is a Kemp's ridley actually making its way to the Gulf of Mexico for the first time.
And Todd, Jacques here, while you're showing that, I do want to just confirm, at least on my end, the video is coming through, and I believe some of the audio as well.
Sorry, Jacques, you said it was coming through or wasn't?
Yes, all good.
Okay, good deal. So that's probably I believe that is the only documented video of a hatchling making it to the Gulf of Mexico in Louisiana. So, and the fact that it's a Kemp's ridley makes it even that much more special. But anyway, one thing we did following the 2023 seasons, we had surveyors go out to several prioritized nesting locations, and we were able to pull elevations of the nest site, elevations north, east, south, and west of it, looked at beach slopes, looked at distance from the water for a number of these different nests so that we could carefully plan that into our restoration effort moving forward. Another survey that we did that we don't typically do with a lot of our restoration projects are bird surveys. When you talk to ornithologists about bird watching throughout the United States, one place that really pops up as a hotspot or a go-to location is Louisiana. And when you talk about Louisiana, one of the spots that really excites ornithologists is the Chandeleur Islands because they're so difficult to get to. So we were fortunate that we were able to really get some world-renowned ornithologists out there to assist us with some of these surveys. So we've got some really high quality data from some very highly technical people out there. We did 4 different types of surveys. We surveyed for nesting solitary birds, such as this willet in the top left. We did colonial nesting waterbird surveys, like these royal terns in the top right. Fish and Wildlife Service did some waterfowl surveys, like these redheads in the bottom right. This is actually not an image from Fish and Wildlife or from Chandeleur in the bottom right. And shorebird surveys, winter shorebird surveys, which are ongoing. The last survey is due next month. So once that's in, we'll have all our data collection will be complete. This is obviously a photograph of some nesting terns out on Chandeleur Island, quite a few of them. But these are some of the results. Solitary beach nesting birds, it's 624 birds identified. Colonial water birds, you'll notice this is 27,000 nests. That's not birds, so you double that number for the number of adults, and you add a multiplier of 1.5 for the number of young, so you have about 90,000 birds nesting, colonial water birds nesting out there. Migratory waterfowl, this is a 2023 survey. I've not gotten the 2024 yet, but 2023 showed 48,000. I'm told this year's is a little higher. And then migratory shorebirds, over 31,000 documented. We have these focal species, and we annotated 1,300 focal species, and those are primarily red knots and piping plovers. So those are both threatened species that use it in the winter, use the islands in the wintertime. And another unique thing about the Chandeleur Islands is it has its own bird, the Chandeleur gull. This is the only place in the world that this bird nests. This is actually a reproductively viable hybrid between kelp gulls and herring gulls. Both those species used to nest at Chandeleur Island, and they produced a hybrid that's sexually viable and produces its own young. Neither kelp gulls nor herring gulls nest anymore at the Chandeleur Islands, but their hybrids continue to breed out there. Unfortunately, as we're losing that habitat, you can see the text in the bottom of your screen. As we lose the habitat, the number of Chandeleur gulls has been in decline. This is another animation I will put into play. This is a live Doppler radar image from August 16, 2023, put out by Steve Caparata in his morning Channel 9 news. This is a sunrise Doppler image, and what it's showing is what he identified as roost rings out of the Chandeleur Islands. But this is what 300,000 birds approximately looks like taking off right at sunrise. It's such a large number that it's picked up on Doppler radar. You can see all of Southeast Louisiana, South Mississippi, South Alabama, and the western part of the panhandle of Florida are included in this image. And that's the only place where you see such a response. You'll notice there's 3 concentric rings. Those rings are focused on North Chandeleur Island, South Chandeleur Island, and Breton Island to the south, all part of the Chandeleur Island chain, all part of Breton National Wildlife Refuge. And that's the reason that Roosevelt set this aside as a very important refuge just due to the sheer number of birds. You can see in the caption below, this once supported the largest breeding colony of birds in the world. However, again, loss of habitat, same song and dance, right? Loss of habitat, numbers have decreased as well. So our data collection is largely done. We've got one more bird survey to get in. And where we are in the design process along with analyzing this data is we have enough survey data in hand that we can start putting together some design alternatives. Now, a lot of the funding we're going to go to for actual construction dollars are the various pots of funds through the Deepwater Horizon settlement. And so those funds will mandate that we obviously look at several alternatives to include a no action alternative. So our first alternative for design is what we're calling our no action alternative. That's why you see no features on this map. One thing I'll point out is this map includes North Chandeleur Island and South Chandeleur Island. The next alternatives moving forward are only going to show this area from Katrina Cut north, which is North Chandeleur Island. So our first design alternative is no action. Our second design alternative is what we call our sand reservoirs. Now you'll notice in alternatives 2 through 4, there's some commonalities. Number 1 is the borrow source is Hughes Point on the left-hand or north side of your screen. Another feature that's going to be consistent between all the rest of the alternatives are this feature called New Harbor Island. The Chandeleur Island chain used to have 5 different brown pelican colonies. It only has 2 left, one being Breton Island and the second one being New Harbor Island. The Department of Interior and Fish and Wildlife Service has told us that restoring one of these last remaining brown pelican colonies is a priority. So it is a feature in all the alternatives moving forward that we will restore and protect New Harbor Island. So you'll see this in all the features moving forward. Well, I'll kind of go through this design really quick. This blue polygon you see is a beach and dune feature. You'll notice it starts at this proposed access channel and goes down the entire length of North Chandeleur Island. And then there's a marsh creation cell on the north end of the island. This is that area that doesn't really have a marsh complex that we want to add and build up. It's roughly station 270 you saw before for the seagrass surveys is here. So it's really trying to beef up the north part of the Chandeleur Islands, really to give rise to some benefits to seagrasses in this area. A unique feature behind this island are these sand reservoirs. Those are these red polygons you see. These are large, they're exactly what they say. They're large deposits of sand or sand reservoirs at an elevation of +4. The reason we put these in here was going back and looking at the geomorphology of the island over time. One thing we noticed, particularly after Hurricane Katrina, was that North Chandeleur, all the Chandeleur Island chain was blown apart. It was broken up, small fragmented islands. But we saw North Chandeleur Island heal itself. And what's now called South Chandeleur Island did not heal near as well, more fragmented, more broken. What geomorphologists observed is there's basically not much sand in that, or a lot less sand than there used to be in that regime. And when they went back and took corings of the existing marsh complexes, which were well intact prior to Hurricane Katrina on North Chandeleur Island, they found these deep reservoirs of sand. So what they believed happened was after Katrina rolled the island back, these deep reservoirs of sand were able to express themselves and really heal North Chandeleur Island, where we really didn't see that on South Chandeleur Island that doesn't have those deep reservoirs of sand. So we're trying to replicate that moving forward to make this island more resilient by putting these reservoirs of sand on the backside. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, this is a $297 million project. All the alternatives 2 through 4 are going to be around that $300 million price range. So alternative 2 that we are currently considering, we call the Big Island and Pocket Marshes. It's called the Big Island alternative because if you remember, alternative 2 started right here at the access channel, but this one actually goes a little further north. So it's the largest beach and dune footprint because it goes all the way down the island. It's the largest marsh creation platform because it goes a little further north than alternative 2 did as well. There are no sand reservoirs on this one. We're putting in pocket marshes on this alternative. Right now, that's proposed to be at an elevation of +2. So a lot shorter or a lot, not quite as much elevation, and they're not quite as extensive in acreage either. But the thought process here was the same thing, put sediment on the backside of the island for the island to roll over, but really target the areas where we don't have a lot of marsh on the backside so we can really kind of help hold the island together. And then alternative 4, we call our feeder beach. So this has, or our feeder beach alternative, I should say. This has the same beach, dune, and marsh complex that you saw in alternative 2. However, there are no investments on the backside of the island of additional sand outside of this marsh creation polygon. Everything's being put in on the Gulf side or the east side of the island into the nodal point, a big sand engine, if you will, on the nodal point of the island. And the thought process here, rather than putting sand in place for future storms to roll over on and help heal the beach, if you wanted to put the sand up front and start feeding the beach on day 1, this is our alternative 4. So basically day 1, it starts to nourish the island both north and south. We know that sand will move both directions in that nodal point of the island. So those are our 4 alternatives that we're currently considering, and we're analyzing to come up with our preferred alternative. So at this point, I'm going to transition to explain to you all why we believe this is not just a Louisiana project, but a project that is of regional importance and international importance. After we started collecting a lot of our biological survey information, we sat down with Wildlife and Fisheries, and we wanted to know, hey, we're seeing a lot of animals out here of different kinds. A lot of them are kind of are low in abundance. How significant is the Chandeleur Islands and what we're seeing out there? And so they have a wildlife action plan. And in that wildlife action plan, they have tables that describe species annotated as species of greatest conservation need in Louisiana. And these are species that are low in population, declining in population, or low and declining in population. So the Chandeleur Islands are home to 76 of those such species, and you can see the breakdown on the left-hand side. But this is truly a hotspot in Louisiana for species of greatest conservation need. But you dive in that a little further and you're working with our federal partners, and 7 of these 76 are actually species of global importance. These are species that are found on threatened and endangered species lists. So those are listed as down here as well. So diving into sea turtles, we've already done some surveys on. We now know that we have 2 species out there, loggerheads and Kemp's ridleys, that nest on it, but that's not the total picture for sea turtles. The seagrass beds behind it are immensely important as foraging habitat for a lot of species as well, including loggerheads and Kemp's ridleys. And I don't see where I put the, Jacques, I'm going to have to put the annotation for this, the citation for this up. But basically, looking at some telemetry data that's been put out on loggerheads that have been known to nest in Alabama and known to nest in Florida, we see repeated patterns of these loggerhead turtles traveling to the Chandeleur Islands, not for nesting, but for feeding. And there's also research out there that shows that Kemp's ridley nesting turtles, or Kemp's ridley turtles from South Padre Island and from their largest nesting site down in Mexico, are traveling to the Chandeleur Islands each year. Southeast Louisiana is a hot spot for Kemp's ridleys each year. It's kind of their foraging ground. So they'll come out here and feed, and then they'll return mainly to Mexico to nest each year, even though we do have our own group that do nest at the island. So a lot of, species of sea turtles travel the Gulf to make it to Louisiana and the Chandeleur Islands to feed each year. And this is a subject we're just starting to scratch the surface on. When it comes to fisheries and fishing, it's impressive. The number of species that utilize the Chandeleur Islands is simply off the chart. Unfortunately, it's so remote, there's not a lot of sampling that's done out here, just a few research projects here and there. But one thing we do know, we have a lot of fisheries out there. It's a world-class fishing destination, and we have people come to fish for these species from all over, really all over the world, but all over the Gulf for sure. A full 80% of the charter fishermen that come out to the Chandeleur Islands originate from ports other than Louisiana. Most of them come from out of Mississippi, and several of them come from Alabama as well. But a few things of significance from the fishery side of things is that there's number one, for lemon sharks. We've learned that this is the northernmost nursery ground for lemon sharks and the only one in the northern Gulf of Mexico. When it comes to reef fish such as snapper and gag grouper, there's several species, or many of these are sampled when they did do sampling out here in the seagrass beds on the Chandeleur Islands. So we know in their juvenile phases, they use a lot of the seagrass meadows before moving to those offshore areas. And then Gulf sturgeon, that was one of the 7 globally important species. Working with LSU, they put some receivers out at the Chandeleur Islands, and we now know that we have adult sturgeon from the Pearl River breeding stock, from the Pascagoula River breeding stock, and from the Mobile River breeding stock that come out to the Chandeleur Islands each year. And then I happened to ask Dr. Dance at LSU, I say, if you have a receiver out there, I'm sure you get more than sturgeon. Can you forward me some of that data you're seeing from other fish? And sure enough, they're getting pings from several different species from all over the Gulf of Mexico. And interesting things, they're actually seeing migration movements of tarpon coming from Florida up to the Chandeleur Islands and coming back each winter. So some pretty interesting movements there. And then birds, we've kind of talked about birds a little bit, but birds really kind of express that international significance. When we talk about brown pelicans, the Chandeleur Islands were one of the original relocation sites for brown pelicans back to Louisiana once they were extirpated. And Fish and Wildlife Service did a lot of banding. You can see this band on this bird in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. So we asked them, they did a lot of banding of brown pelicans at the Chandeleur Islands, and we asked them for their recite data where people had seen those birds and called them back in. You can see those brown pelicans have dispersed all over the Gulf of Mexico into Central America and Cuba as well. And part of our bird surveys that we're doing, we're talking about the shorebird surveys they did in the wintertime, and that are expected to wrap up next month. They're seeing these red knots and these piping plovers, which are threatened species as well. And they're also capturing bands and band numbers. So we're able to plug some of that band data in. And when you combine that to the brown pelican data, you can see birds. You visit Chandeleur Islands from basically all over, North America and Central America. And then to take that one step further, if you go to Audubon's website on important bird areas and you click on the Chandeleur Islands, it quickly comes up and identifies the Chandeleur Islands as a globally significant bird area. And they also get this map, and this is a heat map. The darker the color, the more observations. But what this heat map is showing is any bird that's been banded and observed at the Chandeleur Islands, or any kind of telemetry package that's been put on a bird that went through the Chandeleur Islands. Where did they go? Have they been respotted? And you can see for species like red knots, they go way up to the northern Arctic, and other species down into South America. But basically, birds that have gone through the Chandeleur Islands have been observed in 33 other countries throughout the world. So obviously, this is a very important habitat for birds as they move really throughout the world. And then obviously when you have a landscape like this and so many species of importance out there, it's not hard to imagine that doing restoration work out here is going to be consistent with a lot of different planning documents. So I'm going to show you just a few of them here, but obviously this is on a national wildlife refuge. So what we're doing is consistent and supported by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through their Breton National Wildlife Refuge Comprehensive Conservation Plan. It's consistent with the Gulf Coast Joint Ventures reddish egret planning document. It's consistent with the U.S. Shorebird Conservation Plan. It's supported by the Loggerhead Sea Turtle Recovery Plan. We talked about the Louisiana Wildlife Action Plan earlier. Because this is a large barrier island project, it is consistent with the 2023 Louisiana Comprehensive Master Plan. And it's even consistent with the St. Bernard Parish 2022 Coastal Strategy document. So where are we right now in the design process? Like I said earlier, we're kind of reviewing those design alternatives and trying to come up with a preferred alternative. But the other thing that we're doing right now as well is we are soliciting restoration funds. Currently, as we sit here today, we only have $2.6 million of $300 million that we need. So we're reaching out to various funding sources, hoping to really get that tied down this year. And part of that effort is a video, which I'll play for you next. It's about a 7-minute long video. We'll play this, and then I'll take any questions you guys may have.
In the Gulf of Mexico, at the easternmost tip of Louisiana, the Chandeleur Islands formed the very first line of defense for the rapidly diminishing coastlines of both Louisiana and Mississippi. But over the course of the past century, more than 89% of the island's acreage has disappeared, leaving the delicate coastal ecosystems of the mainland vulnerable. Formed over 2,000 years ago, this narrow arc of sediment and sand spans nearly 50 miles from end to end and provides a crucial habitat for a multitude of plant and animal species. As part of the Breton National Wildlife Refuge, the second oldest refuge in the country, this remote barrier island wilderness and its inhabitants are federally protected. To the casual observer, they may appear to be somewhat static, but over time, the ebb and flow of the tides has ever so slowly reshaped these islands. This cycle of erosion and accretion is a natural part of the life of barrier islands, as they play their part in protecting the inner wetlands from the impact of ocean waves, the intrusion of salt water, and the damaging effects of storm surges. But the ferocity and frequency of recent hurricanes has greatly diminished the island's ability to rebuild themselves. In addition to the devastating effects of Hurricane Katrina in 2005, the islands were hit hard by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010. Their close proximity to the spill resulted in frequent and repeated oiling impacts, further compounding the rate of their deterioration. And now, the Chandeleur Islands are vanishing at an alarming pace, leaving numerous species of plants and animals in a state of decline. In fact, nowhere else in Louisiana can such a vast number of species in the greatest need of conservation be found. The abundance and diversity of the plant and animal life on the islands is not a matter of chance. As with all valuable real estate, location is everything. Nearly 25 miles offshore, these uninhabited islands provide an ideal sanctuary for fish and wildlife. Furthermore, their central location allows them to play a pivotal role in maintaining biodiversity by serving as a habitat linkage between the eastern and western regions of the Gulf, promoting the health of the entire Gulf Coast and attracting an impressive variety of marine species, the most varied and abundant of which can be found just beneath the surface. Seagrass. As the only marine seagrass meadow in Louisiana, it is among the most diverse assemblage of marine grasses found anywhere in the entire Gulf of Mexico. These meadows make ideal habitats for wildlife and fisheries, providing shelter and sustenance for a myriad of marine creatures. Of the many varieties of grasses, one stands out from the rest, not necessarily for its visual attraction, but for what it attracts. Known as the old growth forest of seagrasses, this turtle grass is an essential foraging ground for loggerhead, green, and Kemp's Ridley turtles, the most endangered species of sea turtle on the planet. Just the past 2 years, 108 sea turtle galls were documented across the islands. This is thought to be a dramatic underestimation of the island's total nesting potential. But these are not the only rare animals that nest here, nor are they the most abundant. Collectively, the Chandeleur Islands host some 215,000 nesting birds each year. This is the largest nesting site in the entire state. Its location and warm climate also make it an ideal wintering ground for migratory red knots, redhead ducks, piping plovers, and an array of other species. And each winter, they arrive by the tens of thousands. As critical as this habitat may be for its seasonal visitors, for the Chandeleur gull, it is absolutely essential. A reproductively viable hybrid of kelp and herring gulls, this endemic species nests nowhere else on Earth. But in the span of only a few decades, the Chandeleur gull population has plummeted from approximately 100 birds in the 1990s to just 24 documented sightings in 2023. Make that 28. Captured here on film for the very first time, these 4 chicks could be among the final generations of Chandeleur gulls on the planet. Though scientists once estimated that the islands would stand for several centuries to come, the latest models predict that without a concerted, large-scale restoration, many of the Chandeleur Islands will be underwater in just a few decades. But all hope is not lost. As part of Louisiana's 50-year coastal master plan, a large-scale barrier island maintenance project to restore this invaluable coastal ecosystem is already underway. Although engineering and design plans are slated to be complete by 2025, funding for the construction of the project, which will exceed $200 million, has yet to be identified. As we confront the realities of our changing environment, we must adapt and work together to restore and preserve our coastal ecosystems, safeguarding the future of the entire Gulf Coast for generations to come.
Okay, Jacques, I think that's all I have. So we'll take any questions if you have them.
No, Todd, I've been monitoring and we can definitely give the group some more time, but I just wanted to note a couple of things that you mentioned throughout. It was earlier on you mentioned the goals of the project. I think there were 4, and I thought you stepped through that really well. I've worked on a couple of barrier island projects since I've been at CPRA, and if I recall correctly, it was a State of the Coast several years back. I want to say it was Glenn Leday, who's now one of our new leadership. He was moderating a session on I believe it was barrier islands or the use of armoring on barrier systems, which are highly dynamic, as you did a good job laying out. And he kept on saying this phrase throughout his presentation or throughout his course of moderating. And he said that these types of projects all come down to defining the goals and objectives. He really stressed that. And I couldn't agree more. And I thought you did a really good job. And I thought it was interesting that this project, as you did point out, it is different than your typical CPRA project, and that its goal is very much intrinsic to restoration of wildlife and fisheries habitat. But yeah, just in general, Todd, good job. And for those of y'all who aren't aware, I'll gladly say it. Todd is definitely one of our huge resources when it comes to avian species and wildlife in general throughout the state of Louisiana. We're really lucky to have Todd here, and I had the pleasure of working on different projects with Todd before he came over to CPRA and is in the past part of his career whenever he was at the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries.
Thank you, Jacques. This is all a combined effort. We've had the Fish and Wildlife Service, especially the refuge staff and wildlife and fisheries with us every step of the way on this. And a little teaser for a presentation coming up, I believe on Friday, is that avian guidance document that they're going to be presenting on. That was used in depth to help define the goals of this project. So you guys will see one of the tools that we used to kind of get us to where we are today on the design. So. This just isn't closing too. This photograph, it doesn't look like a whole lot on your screen, but what we're learning is there's a lot of overlap between habitats. If you see those two white pipes in the background, that's marking a sea turtle nest at the foot of the dune. And these birds are black skimmers in the foreground here, and they're basically nesting right on top of each other. So what we have learned is there's a lot of overlap between the needs of various species out there. And I think we have a very robust set of plans, different design alternatives that are going to get us to having uplift for all species. The other thing I didn't mention, we do have subject matter experts in sea turtles, birds, and seagrasses that came together and made sure that each one of our goals were established properly. And those teams have all looked at the alternatives, and the teams all agree that each one of those alternatives, except for number one, would have uplift for their focal group moving forward. So we feel like no matter what plan comes out from the analysis, that we have a good restoration project for sea turtles, birds, and seagrasses moving forward.
Yeah, Todd. I mean, having participated a little bit in the LA 316 project that you referenced, which for those of y'all in attendance, that's the avian habitat guidance document that some of us at CPRA had the pleasure of working on, funded through NERDA. Those three things you mentioned, just the overlap with vegetation, and different elevation. I mean, I know that was a big part of what all went into that effort. And I'll say, and I feel fairly confident saying this, it's not always very straightforward when it comes to finding that sweet spot, how they all overlap. But yeah, that was a good mention, and I want to reiterate that for anyone here in attendance today that is interested in any avian habitat restoration activities, as this project certainly went into detail on. Definitely encourage you to attend the Friday technical webinar series. It should be pretty good for any ornithologists or ornithological minded restoration practitioners out there. And I'm seeing, Todd, no chat questions. Maybe we'll give folks a couple more minutes. We do still have some time in advance of when we had initially scheduled the meeting to end at 1 p.m. But definitely feel free to fire away, and anyone that maybe has anything subsequent to it, my email address is in the chat box there. Todd, I'm going to go ahead and put yours as well, which I have here. All right, should be there. One common question, it's not really technical to this presentation, but just in case anyone joined late, we will be making these slides as well as the recording that's currently being conducted right now available via CPRA email blast. So if anyone's interested, you can refer back to this session later on down the future. I guess last call for any questions, y'all feel free, and I'll be looking at the chat box here. Todd, while I'm waiting, I'm gonna show my screen again
Yeah, I'll stop.
and pull up what I had shown earlier. Let me get some of this out the way. So just looking ahead till tomorrow, Syed Khalil, one of our geologist and assistant administrators, they'll be discussing sediment management for a sustainable ecosystem. It'll be the same time tomorrow and using the same Zoom link. QR codes down there too. Stu Brown will be presenting on Thursday, discussing coastal change. And then finally, as I just mentioned, we'll have an avian habitat centric webinar on Friday with Katie, John, and Eva as a list here. Seeing something in the chat. I appreciate it, Michael. Well, everyone, I guess hearing none, I'll look for any emails to my email account, or I'll get with our folks internally for the coastal@la.gov email account for any questions coming my way. But we appreciate it and want to say looking forward to seeing everybody around throughout all the rest of the events, and hope to see you tomorrow. Y'all have a good one.